Welcome dear friends, this is Lit ECT, the channel which helps you in your preparation for NTA NET English literature. We are back with another session of Questions That Matter QTM series where we discuss advanced level questions from different eras, genres and forms of literature. So here we are today with Elizabethan Age based some advanced level questions, and here is our first question. Who announced in the prologue of one of his plays that he will avoid the jigging veins of rhyming mother-wits in favor of high astounding terms? Okay, dear friends, you have to tell about the famous writer dramatist who thus rejected the old traditional lines. Was it Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, John Dryden, or Thomas Dekker? All these, barring Dryden, are related with Elizabethan Age, and it was Christopher Marlowe who basically wrote these lines in his prologue to Tamerlane the Great, and he presented his intention to reject jigging veins, which refer to the old-fashioned but popular long rhyming lines that sounded like a show at a country fair. It is through this he initiated the transformation of dramatic language on English stage, which finally culminated in the use of blank verse, which later dramatists like Shakespeare also adopted. Question number 2 is about which among these statements is not true about Martin Marprelate. Okay, the first statement is it is a pseudonym of unknown ownership used as the author of many religious tracts. Second is there are 7 surviving Marprelate tracts. Third is Marprelate's tracts are basically arguments against the church which tried to censor Puritan thoughts. And the last one, Ben Jonson and John Marston were actual writers of Marprelate tracts. Dear friends, Martin Marprelate controversy was one of many controversies, religious controversies during Elizabethan and Jacobean era, and you have to find out which among these is not correct. The first 3, these statements are correct, but it is not correct that Ben Jonson and John Marston, they were considered to be the writers, actual writers. In fact, we do not have the right information even now that who was the actual author. In fact, it was a series of 6 pamphlets that were printed secretly during 1588 and 89, and it was distributed by the widespread Puritan social network. It attacked the Elizabethan church government by bishops and argued on behalf of an alternative Presbyterian system. The author was supposed to be Job Throckmorton and assisted by a Welsh cleric, John Penry. So these were the Martin Marprelate tracts. The third question is once again related with the religious literature, non-fiction literature. John Foxe, Act and Monument. It is basically an account of Protestant martyrs, an account of Catholic martyrs, an account of Parliament's evolution, and an account of English kings. So you have to tell about this particular very popular book, Acts and Monuments. What is it actually? Dear friend, John Foxe was a Protestant when in England the Catholic Queen was ruling. So this is basically an account of Protestant martyrs. Its very popular name is also the Book of Martyrs, and it was one of the most popular, influential and costly texts of Elizabethan England. It was produced while Foxe was in exile. He was himself an exile during the reign of Mary I. It was after her death that Queen Elizabeth came back to the throne of England, and Protestant followers also were able to come back. It describes the horrors of how Catholics treated Christians, including the English martyr during Mary's reign. Sir Giles Overreach, he is considered to be an embodiment of avarice, cunning, ambition, and he is one of the most memorable character of the English stage, in which very popular play, Elizabethan play, he appears. Is it The Malcontent? Is it Women Beware Women? Or A New Way to Pay Old Debts? And the last option, White Devil. These are some famous plays belonging to the Jacobean era. And Sir Giles Overreach, he is the main villain of A New Way to Pay Old Debts, which is written by Philip Messenger, who was a prolific writer during both late Elizabethan and Jacobean era. Giles Overreach is basically a father who dupes his own son out of his inheritance. There is also another interesting character in the play, that is the Justice of Peace Greedy, who thinks of nothing but food during every one of his waking hours. So these two characters bring many farcical moments during the play. Positions and the first part of the Elementaire. Both are very popular non-fictional writings about the profession of teaching and were quite ahead of their times in ideas about education. Who is the writer? Dear friends, during the Elizabethan era, there were many, we can say, educationists whose approach towards education was quite modern. Was it Rosa Ascham, Richard Mulcaster, or is it John Colet? And last option is Thomas Lincare. These four names are the most we can say popular and influential name during the early Elizabethan era. Through their works, through their teachings, they spread the modern education in the Elizabethan England, and they basically paved the way for the future scholarship. The right answer for the author of Position and the first part of the Elementaire is Richard Mulcaster. He first published it in 1582, and it was written as a guide to learning. In fact, at that time, Latin was considered to be the preferred language of scholarship, but he wanted to make English language and culture more respected and accessible. That's why he wrote it in English and promoted the language itself. Our next question, dear friend, is once again a non-fiction work. Joseph Swetnam wrote an anti-feminist treatise, The Arraignment of Women, arguing that women are inferior to men. An author replied under the pseudonym Constantia Munda, starting the famous pamphlet wars, which carried for almost 5 years over the nature of women. What is the name of this famous pamphlet? Okay, the first option is A Muzzle for Mills Thomas. Second is Esther Hath Hanged Haman. Third is Mortality's Memorandum. And the last one is Warming of a Mad Dog. The interesting fact about all these four works are that they all were written as a response to this particular work, Arraignment of Women. It is not that it was the first time when a work was written criticizing or demonizing the stature of women in the society, but we can say safely that it was the first time that it was so vociferously countered. The right answer, the one pamphlet written by Constantia Munda was Warming of a Mad Dog. In fact, when Joseph Swetnam published, look at the full title, The Arraignment of Lewd, Idle, Froward and Unconstant Women, the Vanities of Them, Choose You Whether, Rachel Speck. Then Rachel Speck, Esther Sovernem and Constantia Munda, they published responses. It carried on for 5 years and known as the pamphlet work. Our next question is a very important term, poetic justice. Now, who is credited with coining of this term, which became quite popular during the late Jacobean and early Restoration era, which means a literary outcome should be justified in an especially appropriate or moral way. The options are Ben Jonson, second is John Dryden, third one is Thomas Rhymer, and the last is John Dennis. We all know that all these, including Johnson and Dryden, whether they were a poet and writers, but they were also established critics. They all have laid some rules regarding judgment, evaluation of literature. Now, poetic justice, this term was coined and popularized by Thomas Rhymer. He used it first in the Tragedies of the Last Days Considered, in which he criticized Elizabethan plays for not following the normal, or we can say the moral formula, where good ends with good and bad ends with bad. It was actually believed at that time that a work of literature should uphold moral principles and instructs the reader in correct moral behavior. Our next question is, who is the poet of love lyrics known as Sacharissa poems? Now, Sacharissa being his name, or we can say hidden name for Lady Dorothy Sidney, the great niece of Sir Philip SIDNEY. Was it Edmund Waller or John Suckling or Michael Drayton, and the last option Samuel Daniel? These four are considered to be the great lyric writers, lyricists of Elizabethan age, though John Suckling and Edmund Waller, they were rather late, or we can say they belong to the Cavalier age. This particular collection of poems, Sacharissa poems, it was written by Edmund Waller, who was a very controversial figure during that time, and after the death of his first wife, he tried to portray Lady Dorothy Sidney in the guise of Sacharissa. Most of his famous lyrics, including Go Lovely Rose, they are considered to be the perfect example of a Cavalier lyric which follows certain formulas. The Dispensary, written in 1699, a very popular mock epic poem. It was a critique of the controversy between the Royal College of Physicians and the Society of Apothecaries. Who is the poet of this very popular poem of the time? Nicholas Rowe, Edmund Waller, Samuel Gard, or Thomas Fuller? Once again, dear friends, all these are rather minor writers writing at a time when Dryden was the we can say most important and most published writer. It was Samuel Gard. He was a physician and a member of Kit Kat Club, and he also wrote this burlesque poem to ridicule the opposition of apothecaries to the supply of medicine to outpatients' dispensary. Apothecary, we know that they were in business of making medicine and distributing it. There was a sort of controversy, we can say a war between these two sides, physicians who want to distribute medicine according to their prescriptions and apothecaries. The physicians and apothecaries, they had such an uneasy relationship throughout the 17th century until the rules and acts were made to resolve this. During the performance of which play the Globe Theatre was accidentally burned? Now, the options are The Merry Wives of Windsor, Every Man Out of His Humor, Hamlet, or Henry VIII. Now, the Globe was basically one of the prime location of Elizabethan era where many popular plays were produced and many of Shakespeare's plays were debuted there. In fact, Henry VIII, this was going on, a performance was going on when accidentally it was burned down in 1613. On 29th June 1613, the original Globe Theatre, it was destroyed by the fire, and the play at that time was All Is True, which was later named as Henry VIII. Our last question of the day, Eclogues, Epitaphs and Sonnets was the first book of poetry by a single author published in England. You can understand the value of this historical work. It was the first book of poetry by a single author. Though there were miscellanies published earlier, it were works of collected work of anthologies like work. But this was the first work to be published by a single author. Now, who is this poet? Is it Barnaby Goose or George Gascoigne or John Skelton, and last one is Walter Raleigh? All these were very important, influential writers, but it was Barnaby Goose, rather we can say forgotten name, who published this first collection of short personal poems in which there were 8 eclogues, 4 epitaphs, series of short songs which he dubs as sonnets, and it was the first book by a single author in modern English which is about poetry. Okay friends, that's all for today. I hope these questions will help you in your coming exams. You will be able to get some more information about the Elizabethan Age. Thanks for subscribing and supporting the channel, and keep supporting in the similar manner. Thank you, dear friends.